struggling with systems that that we were able to improve at home, but then we weren't able to extend them into the classroom with the consistency that would accomplish success. So I basically was working with a lot of kids who didn't want to go to school. And this was back in 2008, 2009, when the school-related stressors were, you know, that anonymous website where you put up surveys about people. It was like a lot of bullying. I can't remember the name. And like test anxiety. But over the years, school-related stress became a lot more serious with school fire drills and shooting drills and social media, and now obviously COVID. So once I realized that there were a lot of really creative kids who weren't getting inspired by school, I figured out how homeschooling worked and took my background in youth programming and ironically the restaurant industry, which was really like how the pace of what we do with kids, it really like is very similar to how a restaurant operates. So I started homeschooling with 3 kids in my living room.
What's the correlation between restaurants
So
and
if you
schooling?
think about it, so I used to open Cheesecake Factories, right? So the restaurant floor at the Cheesecake Factory is super busy and everything's got a flow, but it's a little bit of organic, chaotic flow, but you can step back and find the system within it, right? So, so if you think about the way the kids learn here at Space of Mind, it's all really customized, and our curriculum is meant to inspire the things that they're passionate about and to be interdisciplinary, but the students might be in a team all doing something different for the same activity or unit. So it's up to us as the coach to really anticipate the needs, make sure that the supplies are there. In the restaurant world, if you know, you've got to be present and keep your energy up, and that translates into how the team will support you and how, you know, you're relatable to your guests, but also that level of on-the-spot creativity. And that's what we really want the coaches to have, is, you know, that understanding that, you know, we may not always have the best plan. A student might come up with something amazing, and it's the connection between the student and their coach that allows you to come up with that perfect next step. And I think, you know, in the restaurant world, like, it was, for me, a lot about relatability and understanding what people are looking for in a short amount of time through sometimes unspoken or in between the lines communication. So as I created the position of coach, which is what we call our educators, it's about that ability to communicate quickly and compassionately to problem solve and come up with something amazing. So so a lot of the same skills translated, actually, plus the pace, like, you know, understanding how to kind of keep going and keep the energy up.
I really love everything you're saying right now. You know, I was one of those kids, I don't want to say I slipped through the cracks. I came from New York, where back in the 70s, the education system was a little ahead of Florida. And when I came here and I moved here, I was in 3rd grade, they wanted to move me up to 5th grade. And my parents were like, no, social skills, stuff like that. And then they wanted to move me into enrichment, but they didn't really have a program. And, you know, that rote way of learning, I think there's a place for it maybe with words and definitions, but having those open-ended, challenging type exercises, which it sounds like is what you were doing to engage the students to, hey, we're not telling you how to think. We're just telling you, let's solve this problem.
That's it. I mean, that's first century skills require. You know, our current education system was built in the 50s to turn out soldiers, factory workers, and farmers. Somewhere along the way in the 70s, farming left. It's coming back now into the curriculum, which is awesome. But we don't need factory workers and soldiers in the same way that we need right now creators and engineers and communicators and problem solvers. And right now, we're not teaching kids anything about that. They're just getting told, do this, then do this, then do this. Do it this way, not your way. And so we're removing all of those developmental milestones of when we learn to make choices for what works for us. And what I've learned over the years is that kids are born knowing what their innate systems are, but it's adults who tell them what doesn't work for the adult, and therefore negates what a child's instinct would be. So we've removed a lot of that opportunity from the learning system. But when I was in the 80s and coming up in elementary school, they took all of the kids with busy brains, probably the same as you, and put us in the gifted program. And now they put you on medicine and label you with ADD. I didn't get my ADD diagnosis until college, but I got really lucky that growing up in the gifted program in public school, when it was a half-day pullout and it was all project-based work, the things I learned then are what I use every day. Like in third grade, I learned the rules of brainstorming and how to lead a think tank. So as a CEO, I use that skill all the time. I remember all of the lessons and activities that I did in elementary and middle school way better than I remember things that I crammed for a test. And that's how the brain works, is we remember things with sensory.
Yep, absolutely. When I studied acting, we used to call it Sherlock Holmesing a script. And what you were looking for is, as you're reading the text, you would take the words, and what you want is those aha moments where your brain goes, aha, that's where you learn. That's that explosion of intelligence, And I don't think that the public schools were really doing that. And I think that's something you're offering now.
Yeah, they're not. And in fact, the actor's method, Stanislavski, right?
Yep.
So that's all built on sensory memory. And that was one of the first books I read after I had gotten my ADD diagnosis. I picked it up in like a used bookstore in Cambridge. And it made so much sense to how to use working memory through the senses. And that's where we remember the things that we experience. And so it is really missing right now in the traditional school system.
And one of the things going on, because I love this subject and what we're talking about, is, in public schools, you're kind of taught to, we're going to tell you what it is. And with that particular method, when we would break down the script, we were kind of encouraged to kind of try to predict what was going to happen. So death of a salesman, what does that make me think of? Death of a salesman, sounds morbid. Salesman, somebody who's selling stuff. And you just kind of play with that for a while and then move on. You're in no rush. Arthur Miller, very American, okay, sounds like middle America. Great. That already describes the play right there. And I didn't even go past the title. And then you start getting into the characters, Biff. And, what does Biff remind you of? You start really pulling. And the idea was to go ahead and take a guess. Take that guess, because what's going to happen is you're going to be wrong, and you're going to go, I'm wrong. Or you're going to go, I was right. Either way, it reinforces the knowledge that you're getting.
We don't allow for kids to be wrong in school anymore.
Love it.
And that's like, if you ask anyone who's successful, they learned everything they know from failure. And failure so I spent time after the restaurant industry in the software development industry, and I was in corporate communications. So I was writing about how software was changing the world, but I was learning about how it's developed. And the company that I worked for was the largest software development company in the world at that time. They're now part of IBM, but they had designed the software development process universally used. And I was always working with kids outside of my job. So one day I was staring at the poster of the software development process and realized that the testing phase is the longest and most important part of the process. And they actually do everything they can to make the product fail so that they can learn what they don't know and then immediately apply what they've learned to make it better. And then once you're feeling like it's good enough, you release it, but immediately start working on the second version. So there's no expectation of perfection ever. And the testing phase is crucial to understanding the information you're working with and the way it's being used in other circumstances. But in school, teachers don't have the time or inclination to pass back a test and say to a student, let's not move on until you learn this. Like, hang tight, let me make sure you're good. And so in school, you have one shot and then you move on. And if you fail it, it hurts you. And so now more than ever with COVID and everything that's going on with, society and our race relations and everything, like what we need right now is resilience. It's the one skill that kids need to learn, and yet we're telling them that failure is not an option.
Right.
But how do you learn resilience if you don't know how to fail? And so we're creating these mixed message environments, and it's tough. And I was hopeful. I'm getting less hopeful now that we're a few weeks into distance learning and seeing what's going on with the school district. But I was really hopeful that this would be the moment that the school system would use to make things better. We have to catch up to where we are. And it doesn't look like they're focused on that yet. But I'm going to try to stay optimistic that in the next couple of years, we can come through this and make these changes in the system to give kids those skills.
Love it. Love it. You remind me of a story I heard about babies walking. We're talking about kids and how we kind of program them in a different direction with what their nature is.
Yeah.
You've never seen a kid who's learning how to walk go, oh, this isn't for me.
Right.
How many times do they fall down? How many times do
Right.
they crawl? They grab the furniture, they slip. But they don't sit there. You've never seen one kid go, you know what, this walking thing, I'm not cut out for it.
Right. I mean, that's how we learn to snowboard. We fall down a bunch of times. That's how we learn to skateboard, right? But so in sports, that's all okay, but it's not. And so there's no forgiveness. And I think that is creating anxiety disorders. And it's, especially now, these kids are so stressed out. Our location in Boca, it's a new concept for us called Space, and we're supporting distance learners right now. So we're like a co-working space for distance learners, and watching these kids log in and follow what's trying to happen, and seeing how hard these teachers are working. And I know, like, Diane, your wife is one of them. Like, they're exhausted and they're trying so hard, and yet, it's not inspiring. And so my fear is that kids are going to start to equate their disenchantment with school with a disenchantment with learning. And that was the main reason I started Space of Mind Schoolhouse, because the kids I was working with privately didn't want to go to school anymore. It just didn't serve them. And so if we want to create a society of lifelong learners, we better make school more fun. And because these kids love to learn, they'll go on YouTube for hours and research something, but we're not reaching them in the way that they're programmed to think. And their attention spans are way shorter than ours. Digital natives, and we're digital immigrants. So these kids are born wired to technology, but their attention span is like 5 to 8 minutes. So we're doing block scheduling, and and it's just not working.
I totally agree with so much that you just said. One of the things I think about was Sammy Khan did an experiment a while back. I don't know if you saw that, where he dropped the computer off in like a poor village in India and just kind of left it there, and came back like 3 months later, and these kids had found it. They didn't know anything about it. And by the time he came back, they were figuring out the most amazing stuff and doing the most amazing things. And he came in there and he said something, and they were like, well, yeah, the first thing we had to do was learn English. So these kids, just tinkering and toying with stuff, it just really, and I know a lot of people like to knock kids, and, my kid is a TikTok kid. He loves his games. He loves his Fortnite and all that stuff, but they're all little video producers now.
That's right.
They really are. I mean, every one of these kids has their own station.
Right. You can build all of the academic standards into those activities. So, like, for example, you can give a group of kids, this summer, we had this giant cardboard box in camp week. And 1 week the kids turned it into an airplane. And so the whole week of camp was travel week. So every day they traveled to a different country. Oh, well, in a school environment, we can build all the academic standards into that. The next week, the box was a time machine. And so the box just kept changing, but it was imagination and play is what's igniting your senses. And that's what creates your memory. But working memory is what our brains need to stay engaged. So when you think about, like, again, going back to the restaurant business, when your body is in motion, then it's able to actually, your brain is able to stay in focus more. And so for a lot of kinesthetic learners, having them move around or stand up or be on a wobble chair or a balance board or whatever. But I used to make a lot of money when I was a server because I could double or nothing on my tips when I had a big table, because I knew that I had great working memory tricks. So I could remember an order for 10 and they would be like, no, you'll never get it. And I would like double down on my tip and then I would get it all right. It would make it more fun for me, obviously. Our working memory is the brain's ability to remember, to pay attention to what it's paying attention to. And like you were saying with walking, when we're babies, we have to kind of remember right foot, left foot, right foot, left foot. But when we're adults, when we're kids, we don't remember that anymore. It just happens because now it's gone from our working memory to our sense memory. And so as we're building working memory for kids, we have to remember that they're only going to pay attention to what's interesting. So there is a need to ignite their memory, and then once they're engaged, their anxiety will fall away, their distractor factors will fall away, and they'll become more organized and more autonomous with what they're doing because they'll care about it more. And that piece has come away. There's nothing really for the kids onto and care about right now in their learning.
I love everything you're saying right now. Really, I mean, with my son, and he had some issues when he was at Trinity, and I started reading up on some of these books on the difference between the boy's mind and the girl's mind, or kinesthetic learning, and how it's tough for boys to sit in a seat for a prolonged amount of time. It's not, and then we go back to the ADD and give them medication, and just the different styles of learning that are out there. But absolutely love everything you're saying. But the reason why we did this was we want to talk about virtual learning. So you've had some experience with that this year with Boca, I believe, and you're about to start it in Delray. What have you observed so far?
Yeah, so our Boca location is supporting students that are doing the distance learning, which is different than virtual. A virtual program is designed to be a virtual program. What the kids are doing is really a distance learning, which is sort of a hybrid. And there's no shortage of hard work on behalf of the teachers. We can see that they have been working so hard. But I have to tell you that my team and I have gone home every night this week in tears. So Monday was a decent day because it was the first day. So everything we were just kind of getting them figured out. But they launched right into academics and right into the routine. But every kid is coming back right now with some version of PTSD. Their attention span is already divided because we've just come off of 5 of the weirdest months ever, and they're out of routine, and they're not used to being in new places or with new people. And so I think that there wasn't enough time paid to just establish relationships between the students and the teachers, because the district has made very strict mandates on what the teachers need to accomplish and in these very specific time frames. And they have to call on every student, which for who it could take 10 to 12 minutes to run through the list of students to get everybody's feedback. Well, you're going to lose most of the kids in that time frame. They're already flipping to YouTube. And so it's been hard. We all, on Tuesday, which was day 2, I think it's set in for the kids and for everybody what this was going to be. And we had a 4th grader lock herself in the bathroom crying. We had a 2nd grader who really similarly struggled. It's not normal to put these kids in a seat all day. And the part that we have to remember is that school isn't or shouldn't be just a checklist of academic standards. It's a culture and it's a community. And we've removed that for the distance learners. They're just sitting there as learning automatons. Here's the checklist. Here's the website you need to log into at this time. And right now the district is very concerned about getting attendance because I don't think they have an accurate count of how many students that they have, because so many have pulled out for homeschooling and are kind of just figuring it out. So there's been a lot of pressure for attendance and not a lot of, I think, flexibility. So, you know, there's, and we can see the burnout from the teachers after just a week. So it's hard. And I think that this is going to take 2 to 3 years. I don't think we're going to be back to school in January. I don't think, like, we also have to keep in mind that we've needed this. The school system needed a little bit of a Noah's Ark moment because there was a lot of things that were already wrong. And frankly, school shootings didn't clear the schools and give anyone an impetus to fix things. But we have on the first day of school, the number one question our students ask, and we got asked this in Boca by a few kids, is, you're not going to do a funeral, are you? Because these kids have so much trauma from just the amount of fire drills that they're being. So we have to make changes. And I'm hoping that right now we can use that time to do that, because there's so many progressive and creative and dedicated educators in this country, but we're going to lose them and burn them out real quick, which is a shame.
Yeah, I love what you said about just the whole getting to know each other phase. You know, that's one thing. And you know, my wife deals with that. And, you know, she's got 2 kids in the class and she sees one snicker because the other one's on the phone while they're trying to get going. And it, you know, meanwhile, she's looking at little squares and kids and, you know, one walks off and you don't have that moment of learning who everybody is. And you know, like when I was at the county commission meeting and watching it on TV was different than being in the room, because I can put my eyes wherever I want to put my eyes to keep me engaged. Whether it's a poster on the wall that has the letters of the alphabet or something cool, you know, whatever. My wife's very good about putting up, you know, creative stuff around the classroom to kind of keep your eyeballs engaged, even if you're not the one who's speaking or the one who's being quizzed at the time. So you're still engaged. Your brain is still engaged. Right. And who knows what these kids' rooms look like while they're trying to study or they're trying to engage. Who knows what's going on around them? You know, who knows what their family life is like? So all those things.
And that brings up a big issue. There's a lot of privacy issues to take into account with the distance learning. You know, people are seeing literally into other people's homes. Also, parents are observing the classes. Right. But what I found this week is what they're really doing is they're texting the parents of the other kids in the class to kind of give them a heads up, like, oh, your kid didn't do this, or oh, your kid's mute button didn't work, or oh, you know, like that is stuff that should be the teacher. It should be the one managing the communications and the logistics of the room. And I think parents are well-meaning, but you wouldn't typically observe your student's class in a regular school. And so I think for the teachers, that's got to be really nerve-wracking to know that you're being observed in real time by amateur observers, so to speak. You know, everyone's an armchair quarterback, but the reality is a teacher should be able to be organic and create a vibe in the way that feels good with their group. But I think there's probably got to be some performance anxiety happening as well, because they're being recorded and you don't know where those recordings will go, and the parents are watching. And so watching what was unfolding for our students this week just didn't feel very natural. Right. And that's what the kids pick up on, right? So you know, that's the part, the give and take in learning is where the memories come in, the experiences. Right now, they're just listening for cues and responding, but they're not meaningfully responding.
That's so true. One of the things my wife was telling me is some kids are actually thriving in this environment. There are some kids that are actually doing well in this distance learning. Yeah. Do they have a different, what is it? You know,
so the pleasers are doing well, right? There's like a certain type of personality that's sort of an overachiever slash pleaser. The kids that will check everything off the list, right? So more of the type A personalities. And I would say about 15 maybe percent of the kids in our Boca location are doing okay. The three of them that I would qualify in that group are actually in the same class. So they're listening and watching their class on a TV in a group setting and not individually. So they have a little bit of culture and community, which is helping them. But the others that are doing okay or are able to work independently are actually the ones that I'm more concerned about their mental health than the others, because these kids are doing it at all costs. And I don't see them taking breaks. I don't see them allowing for failure. We saw some stress about being on time in a way that didn't feel very healthy or relaxed this week. So it's interesting because parents now, I think, have to let go of who they think their kid is as a learner, because there's this idea that I know who my child is because how they showed up last year is how they're always going to show up. And that works backwards too. You could have a child who's actually really good at math, but struggles in one unit tutor. And now he's just bad at math always. And the tutor stays because they need help always. So again, it comes back to allowing for failure. Well, the kids that I'm seeing that are able to work independently and seem happy are actually quietly stuffing down the need for the breaks and the interaction. And so in our Some-Space location in Boca, we're filling the breaks and the after school time with all of that. And organically, so it was amazing. One of the students was really struggling earlier in the week. We sat together one day this week, the whole day. And I wanted to really experience exactly what she was experiencing the whole day in her classes. And I got to tell you, I loved the teacher. She was trying so hard, but I wouldn't have lasted as a student, as an adult. I couldn't have sat there. It was really hard. And this was a fourth grader. So we got to an iReady reading lesson, which it was about simple machines, which she didn't really care about, but I already knew because I'd made the connection with her that she's really into toys. So when we looked at the pictures of 6 different simple machines, I said, can you tell me one toy that originated from each of the simple machines? It made total sense. Her face lit up, and now she didn't need to read the article because she already knew all the answers. She understood how all the machines worked because she understood how toys worked. So then this is all in a 10-minute span where we had a break to do the iReady reading, which is supposed to be independent, but there was no way she was going to do it on her own. So we got into this conversation, and she designed the idea for toy school curriculum and then a toy building workshop. And then on her lunch break, we went into the new art space in the Boca location. I put chart paper on the wall. The room is bare. We just literally had painted the walls the day before. And she designed the entire toy building workshop, literally down to the supplies, where they were going, and then wrote out the steps of how to use the space to build your toy. And then other kids came in and they started making a business plan. They created an advertising plan. They made a marketing survey. The next day, they all brought in resumes that they worked on at home on their own. They assigned themselves homework to make resumes for this business. Then they decided that they're gonna sell the toys and give one toy away for every toy they sell. And they're gonna open the workshop for other kids to come in and do this. This happened because I couldn't get this student to read an article. So we just talked about the article, and then she demonstrated everything she needed to know and brought a whole community of creativity together.
That's just incredible. It really is. And it just shows you with creativity and letting these kids, they'll show you the way
they'll show you. Just follow them.
They'll show you. You just can't, don't pigeonhole them and
That's
don't.
it.
And
they don't want to be told what to do. Look how many cable channels they have. They have too much choice. Let them drive the bus and just be there to make sure they don't go off the path. You know, like they don't want to fall off the cliff.
That's awesome stuff. So back in virtual learning, what advice would you give to parents? You kind of touched on some of that stuff, but let's maybe dig a little deeper there.
Yeah.
Advice for parents that are dealing with virtual schooling. You know, we've heard the idea of set up a workspace that's particularly just for that work.
I actually disagree with that.
What's that?
I actually disagree with that.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. Number one, I've been watching all these like very like overachieving moms who are very well-meaning and very excited about putting together the most amazing living room or dining room turned classroom ever. And the pictures are great. But again, they've taken all of the creativity and autonomy away from the student. And what I'm seeing is the moms are looking for feedback and kudos on their work, but it's not the student's space, it's somebody else's space. So when we design Space of Minds, it's about the space is an open canvas, right? I'm just providing the walls and it's just open for the creativity that's coming into it. So if we really want kids to feel autonomy and buy-in to the learning process, let's let them design their space. Second of all, I actually think variety of space is better, because when you're looking at the same wall every day in the same chair, you're going to get bored and you're going to fall into like, you know, a fallback position. Kids need to have variety to stay engaged. When I did private coaching, one of the students that I worked with, I would go to their home every week. Hey,
and my wife's there. She's loving it. She just walked in, but she's loving everything.
Hey,
so
Diane.
I wanted to be in on this.
I'm so glad you're here. Yeah, so this student, I would go to her house. We did private coaching every week, and she was struggling. She hated certain subjects, but she was always sitting at the kitchen table in the middle of the house. Right. And I said, well, where do you feel history? Like, where in your house feels like history or social studies, whatever she was calling it. She's like, you know, at the living room, because I can sit and watch the boats. They lived on the Intercoastal. And I was like, cool. I was like, where in your house feels like best reading spot? And she had this chair in her like playroom that felt really good. And then we talked about, well, what about math? And she's like, actually, math, I think I do belong at the kitchen table because the kitchen's always busy. Yeah. So I don't get in my head. Right? Like the stress of math didn't bother her. So once we talked through what it felt like for each subject, she figured out what rooms to go to in the house and then never had a problem. So, you know, there's also the whole, like, I love to work in hotel lobbies, and it's why Starbucks is
Oh, you're one of those people?
I am. Because when you work where there's some movement and motion, yeah, you can sit there and be more connected to your work, because you feel the energy of what's around you. So I think there's this misconception that parents have that you need to be in this quiet, sterile, distraction-free environment.
May I steal that from you?
What?
May I steal that concept from you?
Absolutely, steal all of them.
It's funny because I do see some of them. I've seen so many different houses and scenarios this week, and some of my kids, I do see them go into different rooms on different days. So, you know. Yeah,
it makes a difference to keep it loose.
In bed. I'm not crazy about that, but you know, you know, one of my girls has been working from bed the past 2 days, and she's been my most engaged. And you know, she's got her reading out, she's highlighting, she's taking notes and asking questions. So, you know,
right.
I'm not going to be strict on that. Then if that's where she's comfortable and that's where she learns.
Yeah, I think that's the key, is just don't judge it. If it's working for them, great. And if it doesn't seem to be working, instead of making a suggestion of what to do instead, ask, what don't you think is working? Because they'll come up with the next suggestion if you ask the right questions. But adults tend to think that kids need ideas. Kids are more tapped into their imagination than adults ever are. So if we just ask the right questions, they'll come up with way better answers than we have.
Absolutely. You know, kids are so creative, and, you know, as a kid, I would sit there and draw and color, and now I got to force myself to pick up the guitar, but I've made sure to keep that part of your brain engaged, but we lose that as adults. I get caught up in work, and you get caught up in other things, and kids they're born with that creative, inquisitive, curious mind that thinks outside the box naturally, and you need to encourage that. I love what you just said about different environments for different subjects. So anything else you think you would want to just kind of let parents know, hey, you might want to think about things in these ways that when your kid is virtual learning?
Yeah, I think the other thing is to really stress that grades are the least important thing right now.
Right.
Honestly, the only thing that matters right now is healthy, happy kids. And I worry more about what we're doing in the long term to teach kids the priority of that, because so many things are changing. The whole college system and business model is changing. Watch what happens when there's no NCAA this year, right? Like, so you can already get an Ivy League education on edX.com for free. And so the reasons that we're putting these kids in these high pressure educational paths is to get into a system of college that isn't going to exist in a couple of years. And the reason, or the way that these kids will advance in life isn't through their knowledge. It's going to be through their resourcefulness and ability to find knowledge and communicate it to other people. That's a creative skill. That's not an intellectual ability. And so there needs to be a shift in the way we're prioritizing. Like, who cares about AP classes anymore? It's over. That ship has sailed. ACT and SAT tests are probably like gone. States and schools are suspending them. So I don't know if that will even be a real thing. It might be an option moving forward if you want to take it, but they're not nearly an appropriate or accurate indicator of what a student's going to do on a college campus. So looking at we have this this system that's created in pushing kids above grade level or to a certain level of hierarchy, AP or honors or ACE or whatever it is, because there's some status in that, right? Parents love to say my kid is in 3rd grade but does 5th grade math. Like, who cares, right? Like, when we get out of high school, nobody asks us what age we are anymore. Like, and no 10 4th graders are going to be at the same place in every subject anyway. It's all, individualized. So the reason we kind of look at it like that is just because of logistics, right? We have to group kids somehow. But in reality, we relate to subjects at different levels as humans. Like, some people are better wired for math and science than they are English and history or art versus music. But so the systems are changing. So I wouldn't prioritize grades. I would just prioritize learning for learning's sake. So
everybody's going to say, well, Allie, how do we measure it? How do we measure it?
You measure it if you have a kid who's excited about what they're doing. Like, this week in Boca, we had the kids who are doing their online, their distance stuff, which is draining them and not fun. But because we've introduced all these other enrichment activities around it, they're going home and they're doing self-imposed homework. I got a picture from a mom of, I think she's 3rd grade, where she was in bed at night reading a book, not from her schoolwork, but because it was on a topic that she had talked about with one of our coaches, and she wanted to learn something to come back in and bring the conversation to a new level. So she, on her own, chose to pick up a book and read that night. That's how you measure, right? Like, you measure it.
That's what it's all about right there. That's the stuff that's going to serve you as an adult.
That's it. You measure it if you ask your child at the end of the day, what'd you learn today? And they answer you. Right. Or if they don't need to be asked because they just get in your car or sit at the dinner table and they're just stoked to tell you. That's how you measure it. But the budgets happen with numbers, and so therefore the measurements have now become number-based, and really they should be reflections from the students themselves, which is how we do it at Space of Mind, and also from the way that a student is engaging in the learning every day through discussion and action, not how they perform on the test that wraps it all up.
Excellent stuff. Absolutely. And let's move into the teacher end of it now. And we kind of touched on it a little bit, just kind of by osmosis there, but teachers that are doing the virtual online distance learning, any tips or any hints or anything you want to give them? And like you said, you're coming home crying every night right now too. So we're all building, like I like to say, kind of like with the SDSC that we started, we jumped off the cliff and figured out how to build a plane on the way down. You know what I mean?
That's what I did at Space of Mind, right? Like, you know, that's how all the amazing things happen. Like, look how much that took off because it just worked, and you put in what it takes to make it work. My heart aches for the teachers right now. The amount of time that has gone in over the summer to figure out how to take what didn't work in the spring and what they weren't prepared for in the spring and put it into practice. But then now watching, like, you know, I read the Facebook group of Palm Beach County teachers on the regular, and I'm obviously like paying attention to what's going on in the district. And there is so much uncertainty and so many logistics that have potentially, I don't even know how they're figuring all of these balls in the air at one time, but the amount of stress that a teacher must be under to see the unknowns in front of them. And because nobody gets into teaching to not be able to engage with a child. And you know, I'm watching kindergartners do distance learning. Try reading a story to a group of 20 kindergartners through Zoom. Like, you know, like
herding cats.
Right. And so the kids are not getting anything out of it except for the pictures, right? So everything that they want, that they're going to be measuring the kids on, they're not getting right now. It's not translating. So like I said, the iReady reading, some kids, the perfectionists and the pleasers, are going to be fine with that stuff. But most kids, if they're not interested in the article, they're not going to get anything out of it. So being able to take that off the screen for them and make it real is the key. And that's what teachers do, is they take things and they shape them to the student. And right now, teachers don't have that ability, and it's heartbreaking to watch how hard they're working. But I had a student, the one who locked herself in the bathroom crying the other day. We did a one-on-one with her teacher, and this woman was wonderful and was trying so hard. And here's a fourth grader who said, but it's just not interesting. And the teacher said, well, that's just how school is. And I really had a hard time with that, because I don't think she even understood, like, no, right? Like, that's no teacher's goal, is to offer up learning that's not interesting and inspiring. But she had just somehow accepted that that was just what it was, and her job was to deliver it. And so I don't think that's very much fun for an educator. And I think that the teachers have not been treated in a way that makes them feel valued and supported right now, not just by the administration, but by parents. And maybe I'm going to get like rocks thrown at me for saying that, but I think that that we have, as a society, for way too long underestimated and underpaid and undersupported educators. And one of my missions with Space of Mind, and it's ironic, I worked for the last 2 years to set us up to franchise, because I believe that educators who have business savvy should not have a ceiling to what they can create for themselves. And so we launched, obviously in August right now, or actually in June, to launch franchises. COVID was just like a weird, crazy thing that in this moment where we were going to getting ready to go national with what we're doing. But the way that pods are working is how that franchise was designed, that a teacher could start homeschooling with a group of students and grow it into something like what I created in Delray, as big or as small as you want it, but that there's autonomy on the part of the educator, because the parts that work are the relationships, but the parts that don't work are the logistics. And if you can put the educator in charge of both, then you take that wasted energy and you can put it other places. So I think my advice for teachers right now would be to remember that that the connection with the kids is why we get into this profession. But also that, you know, I'm a rule breaker. So I think that to the extent, once you learn a system, you can figure out where you can get away with doing what kids really need. And I would say just start looking for those spots to use your better judgment and do what your kids need, because these kids they're spent and it's only been 5 days.
Yeah, I love what you said about breaking the rules, but you know, screenwriting class, they taught us that you're going to learn 3-act structure, you're going to learn character development, and you're going to learn all this stuff and then throw it out the window.
Totally.
And do what you want, break the rules, but know the rules, and then that way you can break them. You know what I mean? Learn why there's rules, but then throw it to the wind and do what you need to do and have fun with it. Absolutely. Yeah. I think my wife has a question behind me. This turned into a two-person. My wife thinks we're on the phone. She doesn't realize we're on Facebook right now.
So what I've been trying to do, and what we're doing as a school, is we're doing the morning meetings first thing in the morning and focusing on the socio-emotional aspect and the socio-emotional learning, making sure we're checking in. How are you feeling? You doing okay? I'm actually doing that at the beginning of every class.
That's awesome.
Take a few minutes just to check in. How's it going today, guys? Are you frustrated? What's going well? What's not going well? And I'm in the advantageous point where I rolled up to 7th and 8th grade, so I know 90% of my students. So just, hey guys, I miss you. How's it going? Today we shared, I said their assignment for today all week, to make a slideshow about their quarantine experience. How was your experience? You know, what was good? What was bad? What have you been up to the last 6 months? Just to check in and let them know that it's not all about school. I care about you. I want to know how you're feeling and what's going on at your house and how's the whole experience going. And today, my 5-minute check-in was, are you coming back to school? And how do you feel about that? Yes or no? And how do you feel about your decision as a family or yourself? And so it was an interesting conversation today to start each lesson. So
what did they
make that connection with them and not just be like, okay, open your books, let's go, boom.
Right. So I've heard really, really good things about how the middle schools are doing with that. And I think part of it is that in the middle school curriculum, you have the most amount of individuality from the students. They're more independent, so they have their own ideas now. And you have the least amount of restriction in terms of like high school credits and so things can be more interdisciplinary and more about the individual student, right? So I've heard that the middle schools are actually doing a great job of that in the morning meetings. We've observed that in Boca, but what we've also seen is that the elementary schoolers who don't have as much vocabulary to articulate what their experience was in a longer format than a few words or the short, quick picture. The elementary teachers seem to have been doing less of that this week and kind of going into more of the academic stuff. So I think that it's so important to do those check-ins, and that's awesome that you are. And it's also really special that you have the relationships with your kids from last year. A lot of schools couldn't do that. And so that's where, we have to create that time.
I love it. And I guess the one thing, let's wrap this up. We're going into about an hour now, and it's been absolutely fascinating. I hope the parents are getting as much as I'm getting out of it as a parent. Questions I've always had about education. Your brain is amazing. I just want to thank you so much. And of course, you come from the restaurant business, because I think I think everybody should work. And my wife has worked in the restaurant business. I've been in the restaurant business. You've been in the restaurant business. There's a certain perception of how people are feeling. You have, you're intuitively looking, are they happy? Are they not happy? Can I predict what they may want? But there's a kind of an empathy that naturally comes with being in that job. I posted a thing by Anthony Bourdain the other day.
I saw it.
About standing between, you're standing between a customer and a pork chop, or that feeling of and all that stuff. So I love your double down thing that you used to do, because you had all these memory skills. That's absolutely hysterical. and love it. But I think what you're really saying is parents got to be easier on the teachers. You got to be easier on your kids. Kids, you know, we got to give them that free reign and let them kind of figure this out too. They're, like we said, TikTok, they're all little movie producers nowadays. So they probably know more than we do about putting stuff together and, you know, using that maybe as a way to get them to learn. And then, you know, parents being cool with the teachers, teachers being cool with the parents. And, you know, I love what you said about, you know, parents being in the room is probably not the best idea. I love the idea of having a different space for different subjects. Anyway, I'll give you the floor for like the last 5 minutes, what you just kind of want to sum up and say to everybody. I really want to thank you for doing this.
Thank you. I think one thing that is important is that parents should be easier on themselves, right? Like we've, especially in South Florida, competitive parenting is real. And there's this feeling, it didn't exist when I was a kid. I don't know about you, but like my mom had a whole other way to define her life than through my successes. Like, and my mom maybe saw my progress, my report cards, or ran into a teacher online at Publix, but she wasn't asking me to check my homework every night. That was my teacher's job. And so parents in these last 10, 15 years have somehow transferred their own identity or success system to, if their children are succeeding, then they're being good parents. But if their children are not thriving, then it's on the parent. And that goes to that fear of failure, right? So I think when you said teachers, you know, should be easier on themselves and students, and parents easier on the teacher, it really is also the parents going easier on themselves and being more forgiving of themselves. You can't take credit for your child's messes or successes. And it's really about letting them, you let them learn how to ride a bike, let them learn how to live, right? Like, and that really comes from being okay, stepping back and watching, and not being next to them and grabbing the steering wheel every time, right? Like they're driving. And so I think that's really important. But ultimately, this is an evolutionary moment for education. And the same way as you're advocating for small businesses and making changes in communities to keep that individuality of the culture that comes from small business, that's what schools are, right? Schools have their own culture and their own importance in communities. And we are going to see big changes. Schools are going to start closing in the short term. Like there's going to be some initial like chaos. But if we play our cards right and stay optimistic and stay in that creative problem solving space, try to just recreate what got shut down in a different way, like we can make something better. And that's what I'm hoping for. And yeah. And everyone can just like ride this wave. We don't know what this is. So, you know, our kids are watching how we handle the stress and the change and the unknown. And that's it. The kids are watching. That's my best advice.
You said it all. Thank you so much, Allie. I really appreciate your time. You're doing amazing stuff. If people want to get a hold of you over at Space of Mind, I'll give you a chance to shamelessly plug your product there.
All right. So we're obviously on all the social places. And our website is findspaceofmind.com. We also are launching our first software product in about a week, and it's going to be a student learning assessment tool, and it's going to assess their learning style and their academic levels and their cognition and their organizing style, and then create a roadmap, guide each student through the year. So we've been working on that all summer long. So it's findspaceofmind.com, and you can call us at 561-894-8772.
Allie, we still haven't met each other in the flesh yet, but I feel like I know you now, and thank you so much. You dropped so many pearls. I hope that this is informative for students, parents, teachers, and just concerned citizens. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate it. Say bye to Diane for me.
Bye.
All right, bye.